Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for joining. Thank you all for our virtual viewers. So tonight, obviously, we are learning Le'ilui Nishmat Rav Zechariah Shimon ben Yitzchak HaKohen. We're also learning Le'ilui Nishmat to Avram ben Chaim Yehuda and Yecheskel ben Abraham. Also, for a Refuah Shlema for Sarah Yehudis Bas Rachel Esther. So now, the entire Klal Yisrael, I think is mourning. I don't know. I know is mourning, is at a loss, and even more so, it came as a shock for many people. Many people were not expecting this, and that just makes everything a lot more difficult to handle. I know a lot of people that I've been speaking to had have a hard time dealing with it, because it wasn't something that anybody was expecting. He was so young, and he was doing so much for everyone, and now he's not here anymore. The funeral was Monday. I was like in a different world. I couldn't focus. But Tuesday I decided that I was going to give a class in his, to speak a little bit about what he accomplished and what we can gain, what we can take away, something for Le'ilin, his neshama. And I spent the past 2 days, well, not today really, but Tuesday and Wednesday, calling people, speaking to people, interviewing people that had a sort of a connection with him or something that they were able to get. And Baruch Hashem, I was able to really speak to a lot of people. And I want to thank a special thank you to my dear friend Moshe Sofer, who was able to, first of all, connect me to many people, gave me a few ideas. And I really spent a special thank you for him. And by the way, everybody should really give a special thank you to him. During COVID, Rav Zechariah Wallerstein did not, there was not really that many classes going on. Moshe Sofer was the one person that was going into people's, houses, the only one to be able to record the classes and to be able to post it online so that people will be able to get some sort of inspiration. So, very, very special thank you to Moshe Sofer, besides all the other things, which I'm not going to get to, that he does, but especially for this class, a really special thank you. I also want to thank everybody that sent me their stories. I spoke to the people that I spoke to. Many people want to remain anonymous, so I'm not going to mention their name, but those that didn't mind mentioning their name, I will mention name when the story comes. So the way that I want to structure this is I spoke to a lot of people, and those stories that I heard personally I'm going to tell over. But besides the personal stories that I heard from people, I also want to bring up, there's a lot of videos that were circulating, there are a lot of clips that were circulating that a lot of people may have already seen or heard, and I do want to bring those up again because there are certain aspects, there's a reason why it was circulated, and I want to take out a little bit of a lesson from them. When you think of Rabbi Wallerstein, he was such a dynamic person. He touched so many people, and most people know him for the work that he did with the kids at risk, teens at risk. He was able to bring back so many boys and girls, and it's not only like spiritually. People that like you think as a rabbi who does help in the community and outreach, so it's just it wasn't just spiritually, it was emotionally, it was intellectually, and again, I'm not speaking to everybody because I couldn't, but the people that I spoke to and people that were going through this, you could really see how they were so like in a bad place in everything in life, in the physical sense, in the intellectual, in the emotional sense, forget about the emotional sense, in the spiritual sense, and he was able to take that person and that broken person and put him in such a health, or her in such a healthy place, that they were able to build a family. They were able to continue a legacy of Torah. They were able to continue a legacy of a normal life, even though they came from broken homes or from difficult situations. The idea, and by the way, I think thousands, if not, I don't know if it's too much to say tens of thousands, but I would venture to say tens of thousands of homes nowadays are healthy, emotionally and spiritually, because of Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein. And I think the reason why I really want to do it is people know him as a speaker. People know, but he was so much more than that. Besides the fact that he was an amazing, like a unbelievable speaker, but he was so much more that people don't realize. Before he came around and opened up Ornava and all his future programs, there wasn't really a place that girls, women could go and get inspiration. Like the idea of, let's say, a woman going to a shir. So it's amazing, and it always existed. It always, for the past, at least in America, it always existed. But there was something very different about Rabbi Wallerstein, and that was that he was like a working guy. He was a guy that was out there. He was able to relate to people. And I can't tell you how many times I heard this over the past few days, and how he was able to relate to so many different people. He was able to relate from anybody from that's an atheist to the most yeshivish from a person. He was able from all spectrum. The entire gamut, from one far end to the other. Like it's crazy how you had somebody that was able to relate personally, and people were able to I could connect with him from so many different fractions of life. Now, so before he came, there wasn't really a place that a girl could go to get inspiration. It wasn't like to connect the way that he was able to connect, and he was able, and I spoke to a lot of even like regular normal girls, like not a broken home. Not a, at-risk teen, just like a regular, normal girl that, was doing her thing with shidduchim, and then she was doing her thing with, college, and she was doing her work, everything. And then they had Ornava. They had the aspect, they were able to connect to Yiddishkeit. And, I know I spoke to somebody that was in the Shiva house. What many people said, I never met him personally. He never met me, but he was my rabbi. He was my Rebbe. Like, I could connect with him. He was able to connect people from all different areas, and this is something that didn't exist so much before he came around. He was nifter early Monday morning, and again, like I said before, a shock to many people. By 11 a.m. was his levaya. And you think from, the levaya was very quick, and he said in the levaya that was, one of his requests. He wanted to be buried as fast as possible, and he was going to be flown to Israel. So he was nifter early Monday morning, and it was a few hours later, his levaya. So you think, like, how many people can, show up? So, Baruch Hashem, I was able to go and be there. The place was packed. I don't know if anybody here was there. I'm sure there was a few people here that were by the levaya. The place was jam packed. I came like a few minutes early, and I had to stand. There was no room for sitting, and I was like, oh, okay, fine. So I drove from New Jersey to try to get there. I saw like a handful of people from like all over the place, from like New Jersey also. And not only that, his students went and flew with him to Israel. You know what dedication that is, by the way? Give a huge shout out to those students, that besides the fact of the cost of a ticket to fly from one day to the next, but they went with him and they flew with him, and some of them spoke at the levaya. They flew with him to Israel to escort him basically to his kfura, to his burial. And not only that, so you think, okay, fine, a lot of people showed up to Ornava, to the place that he. You want to know how many people? I reached out to Torah Anytime, today. Shimon Kol Yaakov, one of the founders of Torah Anytime, a dear friend of mine. Over 150,000 people saw the levaya. 150. He touched so many people we don't even begin to understand. And not only that, one of the girls was explaining to me that even what he taught was relatable. You have a lot of speakers that they speak about the greatness of a certain tzaddik, the greatness of a certain gadol, the greatness of a certain leader of the Jewish nation. But the way that Rav Zechariah Wallerstein went and he spoke, he also spoke about the difficulties of this tzaddik. He made even the tzaddik relatable. He made even the tzaddik be able to, okay, so now he was able to overcome his tests. He was able to overcome his situation, so maybe I could overcome mine. He was able to connect everything. And I honestly don't think people realize what we lost. Even people that are close to him, I don't think we realize what we lost. You know, when people go and they listen to his shir, they say they listen to it and they get hooked. They get hooked in it. And in fact, I was speaking to somebody and he was telling me that, he was a teenager and he was going to a certain rabbi who was giving like an amazing shir. He was like an unbelievable class, a weekly class. And he met one of his friends and he told his friends, he says, you got to hear my rabbi speak. You got to come to the lectures. And it wasn't Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein. The other guy was going to Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein and says, you got to go to my rabbi because my rabbi speaks so amazing. And they were like, okay, you know what? We got to do the also true. It's like, you come to mine, I come to yours, then we finalize it. I don't know what happened at the end with the other rabbi, but all I can tell you is that this guy went to Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein's shir. He said he was sat there for 2 hours mesmerized. He says that was 18 years ago. He was hooked on Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein for the next 18 years. The entire time he was hooked on him. Shimon Kol Yaakov, one of the founders of Torah Anytime, I was speaking to him today, and I was like, it's like, when did Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein get onto Torah Anytime? He said he got in on about a year and a half in. What happened is that Rabbi Wallerstein was speaking in Queens. And Shimon and Reuben Kol Yaakov, the founders of Torah Anytime, they lived, originally they're from Queens. And Rabbi Wallerstein was speaking at the shul over there. And he was a guest speaker. And Shimon Kol Yaakov says, I got so hooked on him. They said, Rabbi, he says, can I record you on, all your shiurim? And he himself personally would go and drive in. Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein used to give a boys' class every Tuesday night in Or Yitzchak, a yeshiva that I'm also very close to with the Wallersteins, since they're cousins. And they're named, Or Yitzchak is named after Rabbi Zechariah's father. So Shimon Kol Yaakov would personally go, the founder of Torah Anytime, personally go from Queens every Tuesday night to Brooklyn to record Rabbi Wallerstein's speeches. And now, thanks to him, we have, hundreds of speeches that we would have never had. And, it's something that, when you think about it, when you think about the idea that Klal Yisrael, the Jewish nation, Baruch Hashem, we have many, many special people. We have many people that do amazing things, amazing amount of chesed. In fact, we have amazing speakers, great speakers. But when you speak about Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein, it's a different level. It's a different level. He gave his all to Klal Yisrael. He gave his all to Klal Yisrael. And I have to tell you, I had Baruch Hashem, I had interactions with him, and I met with him a few times, and I spoke to him a few times. But of course, only after a person leaves this world, you realize his greatness. And the past 2 days, when I was on the phone with all these different types of people, meeting all these different types of people from all over the world, it's something that we didn't even realize. I'm so happy that I was able to have the merit to give this class because so many people don't know. They just don't know what he did. He started off teaching in a yeshiva called the Yeshiva of Crown Heights. It happened to be, it was in Mill Basin, but it was called the Yeshiva of Crown Heights. He taught there for, I want to say, close to 30 years. I apologize in advance if I give a little bit of wrong details. I only had 2 days to do the research. I spent a lot of time on this, but I only had 2 days, so I may give some facts wrong, and I hope you forgive me for that. But he taught there for about 30 years. And I spoke to one of his students, from Yeshiva in Crown Heights, and he was telling me, he was like, he was a good Rebbe. He was very, very strong personality, and anybody who knows him knows that he had that strong personality. He had a lot of energy, a ton of energy. He would go, and he was not only that, every recess, it wasn't just that he taught the class. By recess, he would also play with the kids. He would also play with the 8th graders. And this school, most of the kids were not religious. And this type of crowd, teaching this type of crowd, is not an easy job. It's not. In fact, it's one of the hardest cases to do. To go to a place where the kids that go there come from homes that are not so religious, the kids themselves are not that religious, and you're trying to be their Rebbe, so they don't want it. The parents don't really care, it's a hard situation from all angles. Not only did he do this for almost 30 years, or over 30 years, but he never took a penny. He never took a paycheck. He never asked for it. He spent half a day going in his time and in the chinuch world and teaching these kids that many of them didn't even want to be there. And he never took a cent. And not only that, it's something very interesting, that the way that one of his students was explaining to me how Ornava, started coming into formation is that his students, grew, and he kept in touch with them after high school, and we'll soon see, why and how. And his students, they grew, they got married, and then they had their wives. The wives didn't have a class, so he started teaching their wives. And eventually, what happened was, so he needed a place. You had all these married women. He needed to teach a class. He ended up opening up Ornava, and it's for all of us that knew Rabbi Wallerstein, he would always. One of the many things that I really loved about him was the fact that he was able to say it as it is. He didn't care. There was no political correctness with him. If he believed in something, he told it to you. Like in your face without a problem. And you hear all the speeches that are going around. And by the way, there are going to be plenty of stories that are going to be coming out now. And, one of the things was if he believed in something, if he thought it was right, he would do it no matter what. And in fact, one time, it's talking about quite a few years ago. I was, more or less new to the field of public speaking, and I was speaking for a few years, maybe 4 or 5 years, still fresh off the boat. And I dealt with one of my first drug addict cases, and who am I to start dealing with that by myself? So I knew that this is something that he dealt with. I called him up and I said, I have this particular case. This guy is a drug addict, and the drugs that he was dealing with was that if he didn't stop, the next step would be the grave. He was on the heavy drugs, and he was doing it very heavily. So he said, fine. We ended up. He says, Tuesday night he gives a class in Or Yitzchak. He gave a class in Or Yitzchak. He says after the class, bring him. We're gonna sit. We're gonna talk. So we sit over there. The classes, originally those classes in Or Yitzchak used to be called for 9:30, 10:30. It generally would start at 11 o'clock, and it was something very interesting. When I ever was involved in that, it always started late. It always started, and now you have rabbis that show up 5, 10, 15 minutes late. Okay, that's fine. Like Rabbi Wallerstein, and for good reasons, by the way. I don't want to take that away. Could sometimes come an hour late to a class, and an hour late, and there were still people there waiting to hear him speak. So he started this particular night. He started, I think it was 11 o'clock. He finished the class at 12 o'clock. We started talking at midnight. It was me. I brought the guy. I brought the addict and a family member. It was me, the addict, the family member, and Rabbi Wallerstein. And we're sitting over there. And we're sitting over there again. We started talking at midnight, and we talked for quite some time. And to be honest, when I started thinking about this, most of my conversations, most of my sitting down with Rabbi Wallerstein's happened after midnight. Nothing happened during the day. He was so busy. So many things were going on that. And I want to tell you something that you sit with him. You're sitting with him at 1 a.m. in the morning. You're sitting him in a shul. He's not rushing to leave. He's waiting till you're finished. Once we were finished, then he was able to leave. And we sat there for quite some time. I remember it was an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. We sat there for a very long time. And we're talking back and forth. And the way that it started is that the family member of this addict was sitting there, and he started telling Rabbi Wallerstein, he's like, you don't understand, he had a situation with the parents, and the mother is suffering, the brothers are suffering, the family is suffering because of all, an addict is not in the right mindset. They don't show up. They go and their addiction takes over them. They go and they do whatever it is that they need to do to get their fix. And he said it was tearing the family apart. And he was explaining to Rabbi Wallerstein. I'll never forget this. I remember Rabbi Wallerstein stopped him and he says, no. He says, with all due respect, he says, I don't care right now about the parents, the brothers, the sister. That's right now, we'll deal with that. But that's not what we're caring about right now. He says, right now, I have a sick person. I have somebody who's suffering right now. An addict is suffering. I have someone who's sitting right in front of me. I want to deal with him. And for the next, maybe half hour, 45 minutes, he spoke directly to that. He zoned into exactly what he needed to do. And it was very interesting. That whole mahalach, that whole, I don't know how to translate that, the tactic, really took me by surprise. And I really learned from that. I learned so many things, from that. But one of the things was there are many times in life where we get bombarded from different angles and we forget to focus on the real source of the issue. We forget to deal with the origin of the problem. And even if it's so bombarded and they're sitting right in front and they're blah, 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 they're talking and they're saying exactly what you do, but you have to sometimes say, no. He says, you're not the focus over here. You're not the one. You think you're suffering. You're not. He's the one that's suffering. So he had the ability that even in front of a family member, he was able to say it exactly as it is. I want to give that. That's just an introduction for the following story I want to share with you. His story I heard personally. His story goes back about 43 years ago. 43 years ago, he was teaching in Crown Heights, the Crown Heights Yeshiva in Mill Basin. Very confusing, but he was teaching in the Yeshiva of Crown Heights. And again, this Yeshiva is not a religious place. And this Yeshiva is in Mill Basin is right near King's Plaza, whoever lives or lived in New York, in Brooklyn. And there was a certain group called the Masmid Club. The Masmid Club would learn extra. These are boys that were doing a little bit better. They would learn a little extra. One day, this boy, he goes and him and his friends, whatever it was, they go to King's Plaza, and they go and they sat over there. They got hungry, and there was a pizza store, so they went and they started eating. Again, this is a group of a lot of not so religious boys, and this pizza store was not kosher, so they were eating non-kosher pizza. And the boy goes and says, I didn't know that Rabbi Wallerstein was in King's Plaza that day. And he saw me, but I didn't know that. He says, the next day at yeshiva, the Rabbi Wallerstein goes over to this boy and says, where were you on Sunday? So he says, I was in King's Plaza. And he says, did you go to eat anywhere? And, he was an honest boy, and he admitted, yeah. He says, I went to eat in a certain pizza store. So Rabbi Wallerstein gets very serious. He says, you're a masmid. He was part of that masmid group. He was a part of the group that learns extra. He was part of the group that was doing really well. And he calls him up in front of the whole class. And in front of the whole class, he tells this boy, he says, take off your tzitzis. And the boy, he told me, he started crying. In front of the whole class, he's 8th grade. He takes off his tzitzis. He says, get rid of the tzitzis, chuck it. He says, he threw the tzitzis. He threw the tzitzis. And the boy that now is a man, he goes and he's telling me the story, and he says that was the last time I ever ate non-kosher in my life. So I stopped him right there before he continued the story, and I said, did you resent Rabbi Wallerstein? He just embarrassed you in front of the whole class. He just called you out in front of the whole class. Do you resent him for what he just did? And he said, no. Not even a little bit. He says he knew. He says all the boys, we all knew that he had such a love for us that we had no resentment for him. And he said afterwards, Rabbi Wallerstein would go to him, and he said, in hindsight, Rabbi Wallerstein said that he acted too harsh. He went too strong. But at the end of the day, he did it. And not only the boy, now he's an older man, never ate non-kosher again in his life because of that. After that, he went to Kamenetz, a frum high school, and from there he ended up going to another yeshiva, to Torah R, under Rabbi Scheinberg, and he eventually became a Stolner Chassid. He's a Chassid now that lives in Givat Ze'ev. He works and he learns, and he's one that allowed me to tell you his name. His name is Rabbi Moshe Shapov. He is one, and not only that, he was a roommate with my brother-in-law, Rabbi Ephraim Kron, in Torah R. This is somebody that came from spiritual emptiness. Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein went and took him and guided him through. Now, and by the way, he didn't stop, after, like he finished elementary. He didn't just get rid of it. He kept on with it. And in fact, he became a Stolner Chassid. It became like a full-fledged. You look at him, you would think that he would be born like it was raised in a Hasidic home. And he used to tell this Moshe, which is now is Rabbi Moshe Shapov. He used to tell him, he says, Moshe, he says, you're my ticket to Olam Haba. And this Rav Moshe will go back to Rabbi Zechariah, and he says, Rebbe, he says, no. He says, you're my ticket to Olam Haba. You would think amazing, He teaches for 30 years free, for not taking a paycheck. But it wasn't only that. Many teachers, they go and they teach, and they go home, they forget about it, or they stress about it, but generally a year or two later, they forget about it. Not Rabbi Wallerstein. He taught in a place where a lot of the people were not religious. He would go and he would try to convince the parents. He would teach 8th grade. And in fact, this particular Moshe Shapalov, he went and he taught him 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, all three, 3 grades. He would go and he would try to convince parents to send their kids to a frum high school. And many parents said, we can't. Tuition is very expensive. How are we can't pay for, high school is very, very expensive. We can't pay Jewish tuition. Do you know what Rabbi Wallerstein said? He says, you said to him, I'm covering the 4 years of high school. And out of his own pocket, he paid for these kids to go to high school. Not only didn't he take any money, but he actually paid for the kids to go to high school. It reminds me that many, many, many years ago, I was sitting in, this Shabbaton type of event, and I was sitting next to somebody. I realized the guy was going through something. He was drinking. He was pounding it back, and I started schmoozing with him. This is before I started speaking. Before this is like way back, and I probably just got married, and I was speaking to him. And he had some money issues, and I think that was really the cause of his drinking. And we were schmoozing, we were talking, and he was telling me he has a few kids in high school. It was a modern place. It was a modern Orthodox type of event, and he says like every kid is like tens of thousands of dollars in high school. And he explained to me, he says, you want to know how I feel at the end of every high school year that I pay all my tuitions? He says, imagine I have a Mercedes-Benz and I buy it cash, brand new, all decked out. And I take that Mercedes-Benz and I fly it right off a cliff. He says, that's how I feel every time I pay my tuition. And I was thinking, when I heard this story, this story years ago reminded me how you have here a rabbi who not only doesn't take any money, but pays for other kids to go to high school. And here you have on the flip side, you have a modern Orthodox guy that feels that he's paying for tuition for a Jewish education, and he feels like he just, flungs a Mercedes off the, off a cliff. And by the way, Rabbi Wallerstein didn't only pay for high school. He paid for their camp. They go to a Jewish from camp. And not only that, he also paid for them to go to Israel. Paid for everything. And in fact, there was one person that was going through a difficult time spiritually. Was involved with many things, and he used to go to Rabbi Wallerstein's shiurim. This is not one of his kids that went to the actual high school. This is, out of other shiurim that he gave to. And he became very close to him. And he was struggling, back and forth in spirituality. One night, he had this aspect of like tshuva, like this hero tshuva, this fact that he knew that he was doing things wrong. And it just hit him like a ton of bricks. And he woke up at 3 a.m. and he couldn't fall back to sleep. And he spent from 3 a.m., the next 5 hours, he got up and he started saying Tehillim. There was like something that just hit him. So he went over to Rabbi Wallerstein and says, what am I supposed to do? He was in a very low situation, and then now he got hit by this like crazy night. A night that he just like got like this inner power to just do tshuva. So Rabbi Wallerstein goes over to him and he says, if I tell you to go to Israel, would you go? And he says, go to Israel? He says, I don't know. He says, first of all, I don't have a passport. Secondly, I have no way of paying for going to Israel. He couldn't even begin. He was a young guy. So this happened Friday night. That Monday, he gets a passport, all, by the way, run by Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein. That Monday, he gets a passport. He had it overnighted. That Wednesday, he was already in Israel, in Or Sameach. Rabbi Wallerstein paid for everything. Paid for his flight, paid for his passport. Not only that, he paid for his tuition. Tuition in Israel. It was about close to 10 grand a year. He was there for 2.5 years. He paid for all his tuition. And not only that, he paid for all his flights. And he had to come back for his brother's wedding. He paid for that also. He paid for everything out of his pocket. And not only that, when this young man, when he got married, he didn't have much money. And Rabbi Wallerstein went and gave him $10,000. $10,000 that he could buy jewelry for his kala. He could buy something nice for his wedding. This is a guy that I spoke to personally. This is Rabbi Wallerstein went. I don't know who alive today does this. I don't know. I'm sure there are people. I'm sure. Klal Yisrael is amazing. Klal Yisrael really is amazing. And I'm sure there are people out there. I just don't know of any. Like how much he cared for somebody else, not only by time, but by his money. He gave his money off to help other people. People that some of them he had a close connection to, some of them he didn't have that close of a connection to. There was his seminary took a trip last year. Took a trip to Florida. And there was a miscommunication that one of the girls, ended up in a place where she ended up getting lost. She wasn't in she wasn't in a place where she was supposed to be. And she was telling me the story. She was, a girl lost in a foreign place. She was petrified. And to make matters worse, her phone was dead. She couldn't even call anybody. She was lost for about 7 hours. She was telling me, she was like, Hatzalah was looking for her. Her picture went out everywhere. Her phone is dead. All of a sudden, her phone is dead. She can't explain it. Her phone starts ringing. She answers it. It's one of the Rebbitzins, and they're like, "Where are you?" And she quickly tells the Rebbitzin the location, and the phone dies again. They were able to find her, they were able to pick her up, and they were able to bring her back to where everybody else was. Later, she found out that when Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein heard that one of the girls in the seminary were lost, he went and he put $1,000 in tzedakah that she should be found. And she said she found out the time. This is the exact time that he put in that $1,000 in tzedakah. That's when her phone rang. She says, I don't know how the phone rang. It was dead. I have no idea. He put $1,000. This is the amount that he cared. I'll tell you another story. There was a teenager who was hanging around, and Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein was in the vicinity. One of his friends blurted out that this teenager didn't put on tefillin for a long time, whatever it was. Wasn't interested in tefillin. Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein hears it, and he goes over to this boy, and he says, I'll make you a deal. I'll give you $1,000 cash if you put on your tefillin for 30 days straight. He said, deal. He went, and he put on his tefillin for 30 days straight. Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein gave him $1,000, and he told me, he said, since then, it was about 16 years ago, he said, since then, he didn't miss a day of tefillin. Who do we know now that you see a random guy that didn't put on tefillin, you're willing to take $1,000 out of your pocket and say, I want to get you to put on tefillin? And not only that, he gave out so much money that his accountant in his business told him, he says, you have to stop. He says, we're not going to be able to make payroll. He was giving out too much money, paying for people's high school, paying for the yeshiva, paying for the flights, paying for the camps, paying for people's wedding. He took in orphans. He took in everything. I want to share with you something that I heard from Rabbi Shaul Rosen. Rabbi Shaul Rosen he runs the organization called A-Time. A-Time is an organization that helps people with infertility. An amazing organization. Happens to be, Rabbi Shaul Rosen is my uncle, so I'm very proud to say that. But besides that fact, he runs an amazing organization called A-Time. And A-Time helps people that are dealing with infertility. And Rabbi Wallerstein spoke for them quite a few times. And he told me, he says there were two major events. He says the first of the major events, he goes over to Rabbi Wallerstein's office to invite him to speak at this event. And Rabbi Wallerstein usually doesn't take money for his speeches. And Rabbi Wallerstein says, I'll come, I'll speak. He says, but I have to take money. I have to take money. He says, not for me. Rabbi Wallerstein at this point had organizations. He had Ornava and all the subsidiaries that came after that. And he needed to fund the organizations. And he says, I'm sorry, but I need to take money. So Rabbi Rosen says, fine, not a problem. And Rabbi Wallerstein goes over and says, after the event, I'll tell you who to make the check out to. Rabbi Rosen goes and says, fine, not a problem. The event comes, he speaks, the event ends, and Rabbi Rosen, the head of, the one that's in charge of A-Time, he goes over to Rabbi Wallerstein, and he says, who should I make the check out to? And he says, make it out to Eitan. He says, I'm not taking any money. Eitan is the organization that he just spoke to. He says, I'm not taking any money. He says, okay, thank you very much for coming. The next time, there's a Shabbaton. He goes over to invite Rabbi Wallerstein again in his office. And Rabbi Wallerstein says, he says, yeah, I'll come, but I'm sorry, but I need to charge. I didn't mention. The amount that he charged is also, important. He charged $5,000. And he wouldn't take it. The first time he wouldn't take it. And he goes over the next time. And he says, he goes over, Rabbi Rosen goes up to Rabbi Wallerstein and says, can you come in this week? He says, not a problem, I need to charge, again, $5,000. And Rabbi Rosen goes over and says, okay, not a problem, Rabbi Wallerstein. He says, but I don't know if you remember, last time you told me you're going to charge also, and I wanted to give you the money, and you didn't want to take it. And Rabbi Wallerstein goes, no, but this time I need to take it. He says, this time I'm desperate, I need to take it. Rabbi Rosen said, fine, not a problem. It was a Shabbaton event, and he goes, and there was a lot of couples that were dealing with infertility, and Rabbi Wallerstein spent, hours going and speaking to different couples, privately and personally, and, comes after the Shabbaton. It was Sunday morning, and Rabbi Rosen goes over to Rabbi Wallerstein with a check of $5,000, and he says, who should I make it out to? So Rabbi Wallerstein goes and says, there's a certain couple that I was speaking to over Shabbos over here. I want you to make it out to that couple. He says, I'm not taking any money. He says, I want you to make it out to that couple. This is at a time where he needed the money. He said, I need the money. I need it. He said, I need it. But when it came for someone else, he realized, he said, no, you got to give the money to somebody else. This is somebody who wanted it. He himself said, I desperately need it. He runs an organization that has organizations that cost millions of dollars a year to run. And he said, I need the money, but when he found somebody else that needed the money, he says, you got to give it to them. And he had to make out a check to another couple, and he gave it to the other couple. So they had some sort of treatment, infertility treatment that was too expensive for them, and he gave the check to them. He was always about the other person. He wasn't about himself. And even when he did do so much for other people, not even, when and always when he did for other people, he did it with happiness and enjoyment. You know what's interesting? You didn't feel like he was doing you a favor. There was a daily dose that came out today. I'm going to share some clips with you that I'm sure most of you heard it before, and I apologize, you're going to hear it again from me, but I feel it's very important. There was a daily dose that came out today. Amazing daily dose. And if you don't know what the daily dose is, then you have to go onto the any app store that you have, and you have to download the Daily Dose Torah Anytime app. You have to download the Torah Anytime app and the Daily Dose app. But anyways, we'll get to that later. The Daily Dose today was of Rabbi Wallerstein going and speaking and saying, somebody came over to him and said, I'm jealous of your Olam Haba. And Rabbi Wallerstein said something also that only somebody that is so emistic, so true, can say. Other people will be like, wow, thank you so much, and take that. Ross said, why? You don't know me. You don't know what I do behind closed doors. You don't know what I did as a kid. It's like, why are you jealous of my Olam Haba? And he said, you want to be jealous of something, said Rabbi Wallerstein? Be jealous of my Olam Hazeh. And he says, what do you mean? What's your Olam Hazeh? Like, you're into like stuff? Like physical, materialistic stuff? And he says, you want to know what my enjoyment in this world? This is Rabbi Wallerstein saying. My Olam Hazeh, my enjoyment in this world is helping somebody else. He says, it's not making money. And he was a businessman. He says, it's not making money. It's not going on vacations. It's not, but you know what my enjoyment in this world is? It's helping someone else. It's making somebody else smile. And I believe it was a son-in-law, I may be mistaken, one of the speakers in the Levaya said that when he would come to the office, he was sitting and he would sit and he would run to speak from school to seminary to, different organizations. He would go all day and he would run and speak in all different areas, in all different, events. But when he finally entered the office, what would he do? He'd go into his office, into his room, and he would pick up his phone and he would start listening to his messages and write down who he has to call back. Now, who's going to take care of the business? Who's going to fund all this? The secretary will take care of it. You know what his Olam Hazeh, he says, you want to be jealous of me? Be jealous of my Olam Hazeh. Because you want to know what his enjoyment was? His enjoyment was helping someone. And if you met him, if you ever dealt with him, you can attest to that. I heard this, from him a while back. And again, I don't remember all the details. I'm going to say it by memory. I couldn't find the source for it. But he needed to build, if I'm not mistaken, a dorm. He needed to build a dorm. So he went to Rav Steinman, a gadol, in Bnei Brak. He went up to Rav Steinman and he says, I need a bracha. And he says, I want to build a dorm. And Rav Steinman, didn't really give him the bracha. And he tried to raise the money that he needed to, and he couldn't do it. A year or two go by, and he goes back to Rav Steinman. And he says, I need to build this dorm for the girls. There were girls that were going through a difficult time, and they needed a place to sleep because I worked so much on them, but then they went to their dysfunctional home, to their home that was broken, and everything that we just put into them in the seminary or in the high school, it just broke apart. He says, we need a place for them to live so that they're able to heal. And he goes up to Rav Steinman and says, I need this place. Give me please a bracha. And Rav Steinman says, he goes and he gives him a bracha. And again, I'm saying this from memory, so I may be wrong in a few details. But Rabbi Wallerstein goes up to him and says, Kvod Rav, last year I came to you and I asked for a bracha. You didn't really give me a bracha. This year you give me a bracha. What's the difference? And this is what a gadol sees hundreds of people a day. He goes and says, and he remembers him. And he says, he remembers what I says last year. Not only remembers him, he remembers the details of it. He says, last year you told me you wanted to do something. When you want to do something, okay, how much of siyata d'shmaya are you going to get? You want to do something. This year, you're telling me you need to do something. Need and want is very different. And he gave him the bracha. And very shortly afterwards, he was able to raise the money and was able to accomplish what he wanted to accomplish. And I believe this is a big differentiation. This is something that you can really focus on if you want to succeed in helping others. If you want to help others, maybe yeah, maybe not, you may help it. You may help somebody else, you may not. But if you need to help somebody else, then it's going to get done. We have to change our wants to our needs. Rabbi Wallerstein was somebody that he didn't want to help. He needed to help. This was his olam hazeh. Obviously the purpose of this shir is not only to tell you about, what his accomplishment and who he was, but also that we could take things out personally. You want to accomplish greatness in spirituality, also materialistically, also physically, you got to change your want to a need. Change your want to a need. Become something that if you need something, you're able to accomplish it. If you want it, maybe yeah, maybe not. And I think that was his essence. He needed to help people. It's not that he wanted to help people. He needed to. Who else would sit? I remember speaking to him, 12 o'clock at night, he would sit there and he would apologize to me and he says, I need to eat something. And he would eat Cheerios. It was an Ar Yitzchak. And it was like midnight. Most of my meetings with him was an Ar Yitzchak, well into the night. And he says, I'm sorry, I didn't eat anything all day. He would run from place to place. He wouldn't have even a chance to eat. So while we were talking, he would sit and he would eat some Cheerios. If you want to do good, you're not able to last. But if you need to do good, then you're able to accomplish. There was a clip that was going around. And there's a clip that, I heard this from him a long, long time ago. And it resonated with me. And I took it very personal and I used it many, many times. And that was a clip with him in the Hatzalah band. It was, for whoever is not familiar with it, it was 3:30 in the morning. It was exhausted. Probably one of those nights where he's like speaking to crazy people like me, or other people are bothering him about different things. And it's 3:30 in the morning and he gets a phone call. He answers it, which is also something, you answer a phone at 3:30 in the morning, and he answers it, and there was a person on the line said it's from Hatzalah, and he's going out of his Hatzalah. He's like, what's going on? He has kids, he has grandkids. He says, well, turns out it was one of his girls went, and not his family, one of his students went and she OD'd, she overdosed, and she needs to go to the hospital. So he says, take her to the hospital. What do you want from me? And she says she's not coming unless you come. And he goes over there and he says, tell her you can't reach me. I'm exhausted. I spent the whole day doing so much for her. I just tell her I can't go. And he says, we tried that. That's all the guy says. But, she's not listening to it. And he's like, all right, if she's not going to go. Basically, that's all the guy was saying. If you don't come, she's not coming. She's not going to the hospital. So he says, okay, fine. he says, all right, so come get me. He says, where are you right now? So that's all the guy goes, and he says, we're in your driveway. And he's like, what? He's like, he thought that he would be able to at least sleep a little bit until they come in. The Hatzalah people were already in their driveway. So he goes, he gets dressed, and he's walking down. And he says, he says, you see this clip going around. He says over himself, he was going to the guy, he says, why? He's like, really? He's like, really? He's like, it's such a long day. Can I get a little bit of sleep? And he goes on to explain. He says, you know this area, this moment in the night where you're exhausted and you're about to fall asleep, and all of a sudden your brain is like, hey, well, let's worry about like 7,000 things right now. And all of a sudden you like wake up and you're like, you can't fall asleep. You know, like that's the most difficult when you're about to fall asleep. He was about to fall asleep, and that's when his phone rang. And he was like, really? It's like 3:30 in the morning. Can I get a few hours of shut-eye? Can I get a little bit of something of rest? And this is what he was thinking as he was walking down, going into the Hatzalah van truck. And he gets into the Hatzalah truck, into the ambulance, and this girl is vomiting. The girl is overdosed. She needs to be rushed. She gets rushed to the hospital. And Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein goes and says, he said, I was thinking, it says on Rosh Hashanah, it was decreed that Rabbi Wallerstein will be on a Hatzalah van, a Hatzalah truck. And it says, but it wasn't, decreed if I'll be on the gurney, if I'll be on the bench, if I'll be sitting, or if I'll be escorting somebody, or if I'll be the one who's going in there. It all depends on my deeds. He says, but Baruch Hashem, he says, I was the one that was sitting on the bench and not the one sitting on the bed. And that's what he said. And now, when I started thinking, I'm like, okay, fine, that makes sense if you start thinking about that. Imagine he would think about that. He went to the emergency room, dropped her off, went back home, had a nice few hours of rest, finally woke up, and he started thinking about it. He says, you know what? He says, it was decreed for me to be over here, and that's why I'm here. So Baruch Hashem, I happen to be in this situation and not on the bed. But it wasn't like that. He said in the story also himself that he was telling this to the Hatzalah guy, meaning that he had this emotion of I can't say upset, but this frustration that he wanted to go to sleep. He got into Hatzalah then. He right away, he told the Hatzalah guy, he says, Baruch Hashem that I'm sitting over here and not over there. Meaning that he was able to come to a conclusion where he was able to be frustrated at one point and very shortly afterwards to be thankful and happy that he was in that situation. It's easy to afterwards, in hindsight, to be like, oh, you know what, it worked out well. And you know what, I shouldn't say it's easy, it's doable. But to do it in the moment where you're so frustrated and you're just done, and all of a sudden be like, you know what, no, let's twist it for the positive. It's unbelievable. And I can't tell you, I used this so many times where I was in a situation where, it was difficult for me. And this thought, for years, I heard this, I don't remember how many years ago, for years, this carried me through, this thought. That Baruch Hashem, I'm in this angle and not in that angle. I want to share with you something that I was thinking if I should share or, how, and, if I shouldn't share, because what I'm about to share with you is something I heard personally, and it's hard to believe that I came there. So, there was a guy, you know what? I have to give you a little bit of introduction. Back up. I'll tell you a story that I said before. And it's late, so I really want to go through fast the story. And this is a story that I heard from Rabbi Wallerstein. I'm sure it's online somewhere. I heard from him, personally. And one time he was one of his girl students, came over. Had a hard time getting married, and she was older, and she came over to Rabbi Wallerstein, and at that particular time, Rabbi Wallerstein was with a certain makubal. I know the makubal, and I met with a makubal. The makubal is real as can be. Delves into some really Kabbalistic stuff, and she met with Rabbi Wallerstein and this makubal at the same time, and she knew that this makubal knew how to read palms. So she's sitting in front of Rabbi Wallerstein, this makubal, and she sticks out her palm. And she tells in front of Rabbi Wallerstein, this makubal, am I going to get married? When am I going to get married? When am I going to have children? And Rabbi Wallerstein was looking at the palm, and this makubal was looking at the palm. And Rabbi Wallerstein, delved into Kabbalistic things, and if anybody knows him, knows that he was very into Kabbalah. And this makubal taught him different lines in a palm of what to look at. And Rabbi Yehoshua was looking at it, and this Makubal was looking at it, and the line that she had on her palm for children were not there. It just did not exist. So they're looking at each other, and she's like, I want to know, am I going to get married? Am I going to have children? And she's throwing her palm in their face. And they're looking at it, and they see the line is not there, and they're looking at each other. What are we supposed to say? So Rabbi Yehoshua goes and says, don't worry about it. It's there. It's it's going to happen soon. Like, what is he supposed to say? So he goes and he tells her, it's going to happen, don't worry about it. A few months go by, and this girl was in a very difficult situation. And I know some people are asking for the Makubal's name. I don't know if I could say it online. After we stop the recording, please never remind me, and I'll tell you. I think I could tell. I don't know. I don't know if I could tell it or not. But anyways, he goes and he says that it's going to work out. It's going to be okay. So a few months go by, and she comes with this very big test, very big Nisayan. And she calls Rabbi Yehoshua, and Rabbi Yehoshua guides her through the test. And Baruch Hashem, she was able to overcome this huge, huge test. A few months after this test, she got engaged. And not only did she get engaged, she got married. And by the time when I heard this story personally from Rabbi Wallerstein, she was 8 months pregnant. And Rabbi Wallerstein was saying, like, she didn't have the lines for she didn't have the lines for children. She was 8 months pregnant, and he went on to explain, and he said the reason why, because she had such a big nisayon, she had such a big test in her life, that she was able to overcome it. And because she overcame that test, she overcame her destiny of not having children, of not getting married. And she got married and she had children. Now I wanted to give you that introduction to realize that, Rabbi Wallerstein dealt in, Kabbalah. He was very big at the Mekubalim. So this guy came over. I spoke to this guy, this boy. Now he's a man. And he said that when he was younger, he had a very hard time with spirituality. And he had taiva, he had temptations. And, as a teenager, you have temptations. And he would hang out with the people of the opposite gender. And not only that he hung out with the people of the opposite gender, but he also hung out with people of the opposite gender that weren't of the same religion, let's just call it. And obviously when you're hanging out in that, format, you're not, really playing chess, let's just say, as, a teenager. And he got into a few crazy, crazy situations. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I want to share with you one. He got through a crazy situation. It was a situation that, the girl had his number, he didn't have her number. She would call him up and went to hang out, and they would go to hang out. They would hang out in the park in the middle of the night, like crazy, weird stuff. One night, they're in the park. It's way past midnight. They're alone. And all of a sudden, she goes up and she looks around and she stares into the distance, this non-Jewish girl. And she goes and she says, do you see that? And she points in the distance, and the guy, the guy turns around and he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he's like, there's someone there. You don't see the guy? And the guy turns around and says, I don't see anybody. He said, the guy's laughing at me. The guy, he looked a little bit strange, and she was explaining to him that she saw this image of this person that was sitting and were laughing. And the guy was looking, and he says, there's no one there. And they're going back and forth. There's no one there. There's a guy there. Shortly afterwards, and by the way, while they're hanging out and they're speaking about this mystical real person that's hanging out in the park in the middle of the night, she goes and she tells him, she says, by the way, she says, I have to just tell you, my father was, I don't know how to say this, he delved in the dark arts, I guess you could call it. He was very into the other side, the Tumah side, let's put it that way. She wasn't Jewish, and he dealt very, very much. He was like the top of the top, dealing with like this type of, let's just call it the Tumah as what it is. And after that, he was explaining to me, he says, like, I don't know, there was something off. He says, I couldn't control my thoughts. I had mental attacks. There's like weird stuff that was happening. And he was close with Rabbi Wallerstein. And he came to Rabbi Wallerstein. Rabbi Wallerstein looked at him, and he says, before he even had a chance to say something, he says, there's something off over here. he says, Rabbi Wallerstein goes over to this boy. He says, it's like there's a snake around your body. He goes and he starts questioning him. He says, where were you last week? So this boy starts explaining what happened. And Rabbi Wallerstein starts saying, this is no good. We have to do something about it. Besides the fact of breaking off all the situation, Wallerstein goes and says, did this girl have a cross necklace? And the boy's like, he's like, yeah, how do you know? And Rabbi Wallerstein goes, I see it wrapped around her neck, hanging. Again, this is a story that, you hear from a Kabbalah, not from I can't say regular people, but someone who's working, a Rebbe, teaching. This is not this type of stories I hear. But the story goes on that he went and he spoke to, Mekubal. He spoke to Rabbi Gamliel, one of Rabbi Wallerstein's, Rabbeim, and they gave different types of things to do, and they did different things. And he was telling me after that he was okay. He was okay, and I'm thinking about these stories you hear from Mekubalim in Eretz Yisrael that spent the entire life learning Kabbalah and doing it. You don't hear this from regular people. And the answer is Rabbi Wallerstein wasn't a regular person. We don't realize what we lost. And by the way, as a side note, he went and he paid for this boy. Not only got him, out of his situation, he went and he paid him up to go to yeshiva. And Baruch Hashem, now this boy is is a healthy young man who learns and who works and has a family. He's completely normal. Took him from that situation all the way to that. And by the way, I do have to mention as a side note, I spoke to quite a few people. I'm pretty sure most, if not all of the people that I spoke to, he paid for their tuition. I don't know if I spoke to somebody that he didn't pay for him to go learn in yeshiva. Whether it's tuition, whether it's Israel, whether it's high school, he paid for everybody. He just gave out his money for other people. Not only sent his kids to yeshiva schools, he sent so many other kids to yeshiva schools. But the truth of the matter is that anybody that knows Rabbi Wallerstein is all these kids. They were all these kids that weren't really his kids were like his kids. He treated everybody like this is their own child. The time is getting short. There's a lot more that I want to speak about. I want to share with you a story that I heard from Rabbi Wallerstein. And if I'm not mistaken, I even said it before, but I believe this brings out his essence of, who he was. This is a famous story that he liked to say himself. And by the way, the story that I'm about to tell you is a true story as well. So there was this nursing home somewhere in the Midwest, if I'm not mistaken, that had a particular guy that was very wealthy. And he went and he decided that he wants his own room. This person's name was Mr. Lefkowitz. He had his own room in this nursing home. Everybody else had 2 bedrooms, but he had two people in a room, but he had one, only him. And one day the administrator goes over to him and he says, listen, we have a guy coming by the name of Mr. Friedman. And Mr. Friedman, he needs a room. And the problem is that we're out of room, so we want to know if we could bunk him with you. You have extra bed in your room. We want to know if we could put him in your room for a short period of time, and then we'll take him out. So Mr. Lefkowitz was a very happy-go-lucky type of guy, and he says, not a problem, short period of time, bring him in by all means. They bring in Mr. Friedman, and they wheel him into the room, and he's on his bed. And now Mr. Lefkowitz says, I gotta go meet my new neighbor. And he goes over and says, Mr. Friedman, he says welcome, mi casa, su casa, this place is my place, enjoy, come here, be welcome. And while Mr. Lefkowitz was a very happy-go-lucky type of person, Mr. Friedman was a very depressed, going through a lot of difficulties in life. He was not up for that. And he goes and he says, why are you talking to me? He says, please don't talk to me. He says, I'm not interested in you. I'm not interested in what you have to say. Please leave me alone. Mr. Lefkowitz is he's like, wait a minute. He's like, look at the type of guy that has positive energy all the time. He says, I can't deal with this negativity. He's like, he goes over to the administrator and he says, I'm sorry. He says, I would love to have him. This guy is full of, I tried to welcome him. He started screaming at me. He says, well, I can't. So the administrator says, please just let him stay for a few nights and we'll take him out as soon as we can. So he said, fine. He goes back into his room and he goes over to, Mr. Lefkowitz goes over to Mr. Friedman and he says, listen, He says, don't worry, you're going to be moved out soon. He says, but right now you're here. He says, let's make the best of it. Let's be friends. Let's get to know each other. And Mr. Friedman says, I'm not interested in any of being your friend. I'm not interested in you. Please leave me alone. I am not interested. I am a miserable person. Let me be. He says, so Mr. Lefkowitz says, you're miserable? He says, Mr. Lefkowitz unfortunately had diabetes and he had to amputate both his legs. He says, I don't have any legs. He says, what are you miserable for? And he says, you want to know what I'm miserable for? He says he went blind 10 years ago. He says, I hadn't seen my children in 10 years. I hadn't seen my grandchildren in 10 years. And Mr. Lefkowitz was like, wow. He's like, I'm so sorry. He says, I had no idea. He says, I didn't know. Nobody told me that you were blind. They brought you into my room. No one even mentioned it to me. So he goes and he says, and he starts apologizing profusely. He's like, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that you're blind. They didn't tell me. And after, he apologized. He goes down and he starts saying, he says, I got to do something for him. I was like, I felt like he hurt him. He insulted him. So I got to do something for him. So he goes over to him, a short while later, an hour or two later, and he says, listen, he says, I want to make it up to you. He says, I want to be your eyes. And Mr. Friedman is like, he's like, what? He's like, what are you talking about? He's like, you can't be my eye. He's like, and Mr. Lefkowitz stopped me. He says, no, you don't understand. He says, I'm an artist. He says, I want to go and I'm going to describe to you everything that I see and I will be your eyes. So Mr. Friedman says, do me a favor. Don't be my eyes. Don't be my ears. Don't be my nose. Don't be my mouth. Just let me be. And Mr. Lefkowitz didn't give up so easily. So he goes over to him and he says, listen. He goes and he says, give me one chance. He says, let me be your eyes tomorrow morning. If you don't like it, you won't hear from me again. And Mr. Friedman, he's like, you promise? He says, you won't hear from me again. He says, you got yourself a deal. The next morning, it's like 5 a.m. All of a sudden, Mr. Friedman wakes up to him hearing, Friedman! Friedman! And he wakes up, he's like, what? What is going on? So Mr. Lefkowitz is like, it's sunrise. I'm your eyes, remember? Rise and shine, baby. And he starts explaining to him, and he says, I'm going to the window. And he starts explaining to him the sunrise. And he started to explain to him in detail the birds and the bus that was driving by and the people that were walking by. And he's sitting there for a half an hour explaining to him what he sees. And after the half an hour, Mr. Lefkowitz goes over to him very proud and says, so, no, what do you think? Yeah, I'm about your eyes. And Mr. Friedman looks at him. Can't see it, but he looks at him and he says, you're crazy. Don't ever talk to me again. He was like, oh, okay. 3 hours go by. All of a sudden, Mr. Friedman goes over to Mr. Lefkowitz and he says, to be honest, you're not such a crazy person. He says, for that half hour, I actually saw everything that you described. Please, try again tomorrow. And they tried again the next day. And the next day. And the next day. And Mr. Lefkowitz was Mr. Friedman's eyes. And he would go and he would describe what he sees outside the window. And he says, here's the dog. And he explained about the dogs. The crazy lady with the wagons. The guy with the super long coat. The guy with the no coat. He would go at night and he would explain to him the stars. And he would be his eyes. For hours a day, he would be his eyes. And they became best friends. Mr. Lefkowitz couldn't walk. He was in a wheelchair. Mr. Friedman couldn't see. So they worked perfectly together. One was the eyes, the other was the legs. And they pushed each other around. Mr. Friedman was the eyes. Mr. Lefkowitz told him exactly where to go in the wheelchair. And they would run around the entire nursing home. And they were the best of friends. You couldn't convince one of them to be separated, to move out to a different room. A year goes by. And, one day, Mr. Friedman goes over to Mr. Lefkowitz and he says, I just got to tell you. He says, I want to thank you for all that you've done. And he starts tearing up. And he says, I see now more than I've ever seen in my life. And Mr. Lefkowitz says, nah. He's like, trying to push him off. And no, Mr. Friedman went and says, you don't understand. He says, I went through life never appreciating my eyes. Never appreciate all the attention to the detail that you have. And I want to tell you, I thank you and I love you. A month later, Mr. Friedman wakes up and he realizes something's off. It's late. Mr. Friedman didn't wake him up yet. Like, something's off. And he starts calling out. He's like, Lefko. He calls him Lefko. He's like, Lefko, where are you? He's like, Lefko, where are you? He's like, what's the story? What's going on? And no one's answering. And he's calling and no one's answering. So he starts ringing the call bell. He calls to the nurse. The nurse comes rushing in. He's like, what can I do for you? And he says, I feel like something's wrong. He's like, Mr. Lefkowitz, my bunkmate, my friend over here, he's not waking up. He says, like, you got to wake him up. And the nurse goes over to him and he says, we're sorry, but, in the middle of the night, Mr. Lefkowitz wasn't feeling well. And we had to rush him to the hospital. So Mr. Friedman is like, is he okay? Is everything okay? And the nurse, goes over to him and says, I'm so sorry to tell you this. I know you were close friends, but, unfortunately, Mr. Lefkowitz, he suffered a severe heart attack and he didn't make it. And he says, what? He's like, and he starts screaming and he starts crying. He says, what do you mean he didn't make it? And he starts screaming and he says, like, I had my eyes, I got to take it away. And then Mr. Lefkowitz gave me my eyes back and now they took that away too. And he started crying. And the nurse was more newer. She didn't understand what was going on. He says, what are you talking about? It was your eyes. And he goes to the nurse and he says, tell me, do me a favor. He says, what time is it now? And the nurse says, about 8 o'clock. And he says, do me a favor. He's mourning, he's suffering, he's bawling out. He says, go to the window. Tell me, this is what Mr. Lefkowitz, this is what he did every morning. Go to the window, tell me what you see. And she's like, what? He said, go to the window, just tell me what you see. It's 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock, there should be an old lady walking with a long, big wagon. Do you see her? And she's like, Mr. Friedman, I don't know what you're asking from me. And he's like, just go to the window and tell me what you see. It's 8 o'clock. There should be a time where there's a bus that's going right now and there's a guy that's walking his dog, usually around 8 o'clock. Do you see it? Please explain it to me. I'm suffering. Just please do me a favor. One day I'm asking you, please do for me what Mr. Lefkowitz did for me. Go to the window and explain to me what you see. Describe to me what you see. And the nurse goes over to Mr. Lefkowitz and she says, Mr. Friedman. He says, Mr. Friedman, I don't understand your question. I really don't know how to tell this to you, but you don't have a window in your room. And he's like, what? He's like, of course there's a window in my room. For the past year, Mr. Lefkowitz was describing everything that he said. Of course there's a window. Go look out the window. And she's like, no. He says, we're attached to another building. This is a windowless room. There's no window in this room. And he starts screaming. He's like, you liar. How do you lie to a blind person? He says, I'm going to prove it to you. He gets up and he starts feeling around all the walls. He felt one wall, no window. He went to the next wall, no window. Went to all the walls, there was no window. He starts breaking down crying. He says, please bring me to the funeral. I need to speak at the funeral. They bring him to the funeral and he speaks. He gets up there and he speaks and he says, there are human beings in the world that are willing to stare outside a window and describe to a blind man what he sees. But there's only one angel, Mr. Friedman goes on. And that is Mr. Lefkowitz. And that angel didn't sit at a window. He sat at a wall and he turned it into a window for a blind man. Where everyone else gave up, when everybody else hit a brick wall, Mr. Lefkowitz opened up a window for me. And I have to tell you, I believe this was Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein. Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein was where everybody else gave up on this person. Where everybody else said, there's no hope. They hit a brick wall. Rabbi Wallerstein went and turned that wall into a window. He gave hope for that person. And there are thousands of people today, because of the window that Rabbi Wallerstein created for their wall, they're existing today. They're living healthy lives. They're married. They're religious because of the windows that Rabbi Wallerstein created for the brick walls in the people's lives. And not only that, but I want to share with you the way that Rabbi Wallerstein explains it. He says, we all have brick walls in our lives. We're dealing with our own things. And then you have a friend that has a need, that needs something. And you're dealing with too much of your own stuff. Like, I can't deal with this right now. says, you want to know what an angel is? An angel goes, and even though he has a brick wall, he turns that brick wall into a window for somebody else. And I think that's something that we can learn. One of the many things we can learn from Wallerstein. That he went where people gave up, where people had nothing. He went and he gave them everything. He gave them his time, gave them his energy, gave them his money. You know, yeah, he took kids off the streets. He helped where no one else could. But do people realize his goal? His goal was to get them to learn Torah and to build a Jewish home. It wasn't just getting the people off. He carried them through the process until they were healthy and even paid for many of their parts in their weddings. We don't realize what we lost. We really don't realize what we lost. And of course, all this, you can't do this without, a strong wife. You got to give credit to his wife, Mrs. Wallerstein, Mrs. Esty Wallerstein. The amount, I saw him way into the middle of the night. I don't know when she saw him, when you listen to all his children, he always had time for he made time for everybody. Where he had this time, I don't know. But he made time for everybody, including his family, including his kids, including his wife. And I speak to a lot of people, and a lot of people have a hard time. I don't want to end off. I know it's getting late. How do we cope with this? Many people are really going through difficulties during this time. And, when someone passes away, one of the best ways to cope is to do something for the neshama. To do something for him. Yes, he went on to the next world. Yes, he's no longer with us. But that doesn't mean that you can't. He did so much for us. We should do for him. Do something. Le'ilin his neshama. Torah Anytime is dedicating the entire year for his neshama, for his schos. An entire year. Everything Torah Anytime. They're dedicating for the entire year. Torah Anytime now put out, not now, already a while back already, a brand new app. A daily dose app and a new app. By the way, it's not updatable. You have to download the new app. You go to the app stores and you download the brand new, the newer app. I think everybody should go and download the apps. Download the daily dose apps. Everything now for the next year is le'ilei his neshama. It's for his soul. Not only that, his students, what they're doing, his close students, what they started doing is he was very into the Kav HaYashar. One of the few Sfarim, one of the many Sfarim, I shouldn't say few, that he was very, very, he had a very close connection to was the Kav HaYashar. He was very close to the Chidah. He loved the Chidah. He loved also the Kav HaYashar. In fact, he introduced me to the Kav HaYashar. I remember, when I first bought the Kav HaYashar, I read it cover to cover. It's such a good sefer. Oh my gosh! And it exists now in English. You're able to do that. And his students went and they opened up they wanted to go and everybody should go and learn Kav HaYashar because that's something that he pushed, very much so. And they wanted to finish the Kav HaYashar. The problem is that within a few minutes, the entire thing was taken up. Like everybody took it up. So what they're trying to do now is they're trying to finish the Kav HaYashar Kav times. Kav HaYashar, Kav is Kuf Beis, the numerical value is 102. There's 102 chapters in Kav HaYashar. They're trying to finish it 102 times. So Meretz Hashem, I'm going to put in a link in the Torah Anytime description on the bottom over there. Once this gets uploaded for the link if you wanted to go and you want to sign up. That's another thing that you can do. The Kav HaYashar, download Torah Anytime, listen to Torah Anytime. The third thing that I want to mention about what we could do for his neshama is that we all know that he started an organization called Ornava. Ornava, it branched out from Ornava to Teres Nava to Benos Bina to Benos Chayes Academy to the ranch and to Shabbosim to so many different programs that branched out. The amount that Rabbi Wallerstein raised every year was roughly about $6.3 million that he needed to fund this. And unfortunately, now he's no longer here to fund it. So they're asking everybody to go and to fundraise, to donate whatever they can for Ornava. So they're fundraising $6.3 million for the year for for Ornava. And I'm going to put in a link if you want. You could just go to ornava.com to find, and it will bring you to the link to donate. And if not, I posted the link also in the chat box. One of the things that Rabbi Wallerstein also, put out a lot is that if someone went through some sort of difficulty, now you have the power to go and help. And if you overcame it, you have the power to help somebody else. And in fact, I utilize this a lot when dealing with people that overcame drug addictions. It says, okay, now that you overcame this, now go help somebody else. I know one of his students came and messaged me and told me that, he was going through something. And at a certain Shabbaton, Rabbi Wallerstein introduced him to, introduced him to a certain person. He says, this guy is going through something similar. You could help him. And this boy went and he sat with him sat for hours to go and to talk to him and help him. Says, listen, I went through something similar that you went through. And now his student told me, he says, Baruch Hashem, this guy was able to get out of a situation and he's doing better than ever. Because when you go through something, you connect to somebody else that went through that issue. So for whatever you went through in your life, you have that ability to go and help somebody else in that aspect. I want to finish off with one final thought, and we'll open up to questions. Rabbi Wallerstein went, and this is also a clip that was going around. He said, you want to know what the tragedy of death is? This is what he speaks about. He says the tragedy of death is that ends somebody's potential. While you're alive, you have a potential. Because if you think about it, it says, why do we mourn a tzaddik? A tzaddik is going to a better place. He's going to Olam Haba. He's going to the best place. Imagine he's going to a 5-star resort. Why would we mourn for him? And Rabbi Wallerstein goes on and says, want to know why we mourn? He says we mourn because that tzaddik doesn't have potential anymore. He's no longer able to accomplish anything. The greatest tragedy in life is the end of potential. That's the greatest tragedy in life. This is words from Rabbi Wallerstein, not mine. So I'm going to ask each and every one of you, each and every one of us, what are we doing with our potential? What are we accomplishing? Did you put a smile on someone's face? Did you help somebody? Did you sit and learn instead of wasting time? Did you dress more modestly? Did you treat your wife with respect? Did you treat your children with respect? What are we doing with our potential? Unfortunately, people that pass away, the potential is over. But Baruch Hashem, we're still around. We're still here. So the question that we all have to ask ourselves is, what are we doing with our potential? May this class be a schus for his neshama. May it just go higher and higher with the amount of amazing stuff that he did for the entire Klal Yisrael. And I hope this class gave you a little bit of a glimpse of who he was. And I guarantee you there's going to be so much more stories that are going to be coming out of what he accomplished in this world in a mere 64 years. And I have to tell you, the past few days were very hard for me. He was the king of Kiruv. This is something that I hold very dear to me. He was the king of it. Accomplished so much. While his shoes are too big to fill, we can each do something to help somebody else in his merit, to help fill the void that we all have now because he is no longer with us. May also the family have a complete nechama and be able to really, get through this. We'll open up for questions now. Okay. The Sefer is the Kav Yashar that I mentioned. Oh, I don't know if there's a problem with the donate button, but try again later if they're having a problem over there. Okay, next thing we have over here, I've heard Rabbi Wallerstein's name in passing, but never was really involved in program or work. Of course, this is a huge loss, but what do I do if I don't really feel it? Intellectually, I know the tragedy that hit Klal Yisrael, but emotionally, I can't seem to make myself really feel this. What can I do to allow this to really affect me and to grow and to learn? That's a good question. So there's a lot of things that I could come out to that, but because of the late hour, I do want to mention what I think that you should do is listen to a few of his classes. Just pick any one, right? It doesn't matter. They're all great. Just listen to who he was. But the truth of the matter is that whenever there's a righteous person that passes away, if we're not affected by it, it's a very big problem. It's very, very important that Klal Yisrael, that all of us, when a tzaddik passes away, we have to be affected. We have to mourn the loss. It's a very, very big thing. Okay. Can you please post the WhatsApp chat link you mentioned earlier when you have a chance? Yes. Can somebody, let me see if I'm able to, I'm going to try doing it now, and posting the link. If anybody could do it, I'm going to see if I can sign up from WhatsApp here and post the chat. There, we have our classes posted over there with all the details. Okay. Okay, I know there's a few things. I'm sorry that there was a little bit of a bad connection. But please, like instead of going over with it, we have a few questions I want to get through and I want to end this. So without being so late, we will Me'er Hashem post it online, so you could see anything that you missed on online. Okay, next question over here. Oh, before we have the question, I'm posting the link for the chat. So it's being posted in the message. If you want to join, you could hit that link. Okay. Next question is, where are we over here? Okay, Amen on all the brachos. Okay, why do we cover our eyes when it's Shema? Do you have a class on Yichud? If you bought something during the Omer, can you wear it on Shabbos and wear it? Okay, these are all great questions, but I'm sorry I have to skip over. Usually, I have to say this. Usually, we go through any Q&A during this time, but now I'm going to try to minimize that just because I do have to run. But we're going to try to answer as few questions. But I'm sorry, I usually don't skip. For anybody who wants, you could go and ask the question. First of all, you could ask me privately. You could send it to me. I'm sure most of you have my cell phone. You could send it to me and I'll message you privately. But I do have to run very shortly. But I do want to answer whatever questions we have over here that's related to the topic. Usually, it's open to anything. Okay. 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 A lot of questions that are not related to this. Okay. Here we go. How does one balance the feelings of a loss of a tzaddik to not fall into sadness or depression? The world seems much darker without Rabbi Wallerstein and Rabbi Kamenetsky. Should we feel these are signs of Mashiach is very close? Number one is yes. Number two is you should feel the loss of a tzaddik. It is a darker place. You're right. The world is a different world than it was last week, and there was, a month and a half ago before Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky passed away. But what we need to do is we need to pick up the pieces and we need to move forward. We need to do things that they used to do. We need to increase in our learning. We need to increase in our chesed. Okay. I know that at the time of the Mashiach, Hashem takes the tzaddikim because he doesn't want them to see the suffering, but the tzaddikim like Rabbi Wallerstein would want to help the nation, and also the test of Mashiach will be much greater, and we will definitely need more help now than ever. Why won't Hashem let the tzaddikim stay? So that's a great question, and there's really a lot to say in that, but I'll tell you, it's not always related to what in Mashiach. Sometimes a person's tafkid is done. Sometimes a tzaddik's a kapara for the nation, for the Jewish nation. Sometimes there is a lot more that comes into play. So there's a lot more that comes into play than that. Okay. There's a few more questions. We're gonna do one more, and then we're gonna have to stop. The truth is, I only have to stop for 5 minutes, so I could leave and then come back, and we can continue questions. But I do have to do something very quickly for 5 minutes right now, but I'll finish off with one final question, and that is, are there any Rabbanim that took the place of Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky? And to be honest, I don't know if there's anybody that could take the place of Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, but there are Gedolim in Eretz Yisrael. You have Rabbi Gershon Edelstein, you have a few Gedolim that are, the Gadol of Klal Yisrael, and that are stepping up, but again, like Rabbi Chaim, I don't know if anybody else exists. I want to thank you all for joining. I'm sorry for rushing the questions. Usually we go and we sit as long as you need, but I do need to run for a few minutes, and I could come back. I'm not going to hang up, so if you want, I could come back and we could discuss something more. But for now, I want to thank everybody for joining. I want to thank everybody for coming to the class, and this should be a merit to Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein and the entire family and the entire class. And don't forget, the purpose of these types of classes is not only to hear about it, but to do something. So everybody could take something else out, but please, what I ask of each and every single one of us is please take something personally. take something and do something for the neshama of Rabbi Zechariah Shimon ben Yitzchak HaKohen. Yashikayach, thank you all for coming. A little bit of recording on this. But, okay, so regarding other questions, doing something personal. So you can do things that, first of all, you can do anything that you want for his neshama. If you want to do some things that were maybe more closer to him, he put out a sefer on Hakar Satov. Hakar Satov was huge for him, and I think maybe something like that, maybe focusing on Hakar Satov. Okay. Main for the next question. Okay, next thing is we have an idea of something to take on, is to do something tzniut related. Rabbi Wallerstein often spoke about tzniut and reminded us to try to feel Hashem's presence with us at all times. Is this how you want to speak, dress, behave in front of the Almighty? That's also a very, very important and great idea of tznius-wise. There's another question. I'm just asking, do we have any pics from his family? No, I don't have any pictures of his family. I'm sorry about that. Okay, yes, very true. Okay, fine, next. Another idea is to spend our time more wisely, less internet or smartphone time. As we know, Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein did have a flip phone. That is very true. A bit off topic, but a bit comforting. It is true that Tchias HaMeisim must start by 2030 because the Zohar and L'Shem says so, or could they be wrong? So there is an idea that a certain amount of time before the year 6000, it's not 230, it's a little bit after that, if I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves it correctly. But there's a certain idea that there, obviously Api Chazal, that Tchias HaMeisim is supposed to start in a certain period of time, and that's Eretz Hashem within all our lifetimes, within the, I'd say within about 15 years or so. So that is something that, can they be wrong? It's very, very difficult. When we deal with things from Mashiach, when we deal with, there's a lot to speak about it. And if you look at my classes, we gave about, I think it was over 20 classes on Mashiach, or close to 20 classes on Mashiach, on different, ideas of Mashiach. When you're dealing with predicting of when Mashiach will come, it is very, very difficult, because a lot of things the Chazal speak about is an opportune time for when it would come. Not that it has to come, but this particular Chazal that Tchias HaMeisim is supposed to start, I think that's more straightforward. But again, the way that the Rambam goes and explains it, that we will know Mashiach when we will understand all the predictions, everything once Mashiach comes. Okay, yes, we could do off-topic questions now. My thing that I need to do took out less. No, Shiva is not on Shabbos. Okay, do you mind going in? Okay, next question we have here is: do you mind going deeper into reasons tzaddikim are passing away before Mashiach? It really doesn't make any sense to me that Hashem would take the people who are upholding the nation right when we need them the most. Also, everyone wants to see Mashiach. Why should tzaddikim be any different? Should we ask to die before Mashiach and come back to Tchias HaMeisim? If that's the, I'm not sure what the next word is, Hashem does for his most beloved tzaddikim. Okay, so this is a very, very good question. So the question really is that you have these tzaddikim that literally give everything for Klal Yisrael, and then they pass away before Mashiach comes. So the real question is why? Why couldn't they stick around for when Mashiach comes? So it's very difficult to be God's accountant. And I shouldn't say it's difficult, it's impossible. We can't be HaKadosh Baruch Hu's accountant. We can't try to figure out and be like, okay, why did Hashem do this? And in fact, when you speak about Rabbi Wallerstein, he spoke so much about Mashiach. He was so connected to his emunah, his bitachon, the idea of Mashiach, he was so connected to it, how he wanted to serve in the Beis HaMikdash. So the question does get further, but the problem is that we're asking questions on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we can't. There's no, we don't know the cheshbonos, we don't know the calculations. We can't be Hashem's accountant. We can't start asking questions that we don't know the answer for. We don't know, is it possible that, we know that tzaddikim pass away as a kapara, as an atonement for the Jewish nation. Who knows what would have happened if not for that? Tzaddikim pass away because their tafkid is completed, and they don't need to be here any longer. Tzaddikim, there's so many different reasons, and once we try to understand something that we can't begin to understand, we fall into this wormhole that is not healthy. So yes, we have questions. And yes, we'll always have questions. But one of the most important things that we have to realize is that even though we have questions, we know we're not the one in charge. We know we're not Hashem's accountant. We have questions. Well, why? So young, 64 years old. Could have accomplished so much more. Accomplished so much in the years that he was here. Imagine what he accomplished. And it was just, the momentum was just growing. We don't know. No one can tell you. HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided that it's time for him to come back. Go back to bring his neshama up there. Okay.
I have a little further on that question. I heard that it's also for like a chesed to the tzaddikim, kind of like how Abraham died when Esau was bar mitzvah because like he didn't want to see the sins that he was doing. So, if this is a chesed to the tzaddikim, then perhaps like I'm saying the time of Mashiach isn't going to be blowing the shofar and then everyone's there. There's going to be war and stuff. Is it possibly better to daven that we pass away before Mashiach and then just come back with the Mason?
So that's a good question. Should we daven to not be in the Chevle Mashiach, the suffering of Mashiach? And the answer is no. You should not daven that you will die before your time. That's definitely, you want to daven not only that you want to daven that you should have a long life, more than your time. And the truth of the matter is, we really don't know when we look at the big picture. Rabbi Wallerstein died, passed away young, 64. But we don't know if he was supposed to, pass away earlier. And because of his chosim, he was granted extra years. I mean, we don't know that. We don't know all the calculations. But definitely we don't want to ask to be taken away early. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu put us in this world, there's a reason we're here, and we have to accomplish something. We have the opportunity, the potential, the ability to do something, and we have to utilize that. We have to utilize our potential.
Also, just what does the Kaveh Yashar speak about?
The Kaveh Yashar is a sefer that speaks about Musar. It's very Kabbalistic. It's a Kabbalistic sefer that speaks about Musar and different ideas from a Kabbalistic perspective. Some of the things are difficult, are scary to read, but I think it's very, very important. Me and my wife, we both finished it cover to cover, and you could buy them in every farm store. There's an English version. They did a fantastic job in translation of it in English. And it's really something that it gives you a perspective from a very, very serious Kabbalistic angle, but it's more focused on the Musar and different things of that nature.
Where does the whole Kabbalah come from in the Torah?
Kabbalah was part of the oral law. Kabbalah is not something new. So the idea of Kabbalah, so we had Moshe Rabbeinu that got the Torah from Har Sinai. So we know we had the Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh. We have the written Torah and the oral Torah. So the written Torah was written. We have the Chamishi Torah and later the Nevi'im and the Ksubim. So we have the written Torah. Then came the oral Torah. The oral Torah was always in existence, but it was always done orally. And then when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi came around, it went into writing. And then when the Gemara came with the Ravina Ravashi, it went into writing also. And eventually, all the oral law came into writing. Kabbalah is part of the oral law, part of the Torah Shebal Peh, but it was a sort of more select people that would receive it. Meaning that the way that Torah Shebal Peh was given over to everybody. You wanted to learn, the Gemara aspect, everybody was able to learn it. But Kabbalah was more for people that were on a higher level. Kabbalah is something that gives you the secrets, the underlining reasons, the underlining ideas to many, many things, to creation, to Torah, to mitzvos, to the body, to the soul, to the mind, different things that gives you the depths, the secret of it. And it wasn't for everybody, and it's still not for everybody. So it was always given, the Kabbalah was given from Moshe Rabbeinu also. It was just given to a select few, and that select few was given to another select few. So it was more of the, I don't know if secretive is the right word, but that's the word that it's used a lot. But it was more, selected, people that were at a high enough level that were able to comprehend it, to understand it. Really, if you want to learn Kabbalah, you have to know Kol Torah Kula. You have to finish the Gemara. You have to finish the Tanakh. You have to finish everything, and then you can begin to studying, Kabbalah. Kabbalah is very, very complex, and if you don't have a very strong foundation in Torah Sheba'al Peh, Torah Shebeksav, everything else, you have a very hard time learning it and understanding it. It's a very big problem when now all these Kabbalah centers came out and they started, they put a mockery to all what Kabbalah really stands for. But in any case, Kabbalah always existed. It's not something new. It's not something that came out. It was from it's Torah Sinai. It's from Moshe Rabbeinu.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay. The next thing we have here is more like a comment. He was also involved in publishing a sefer on Kibbud Avim, right? That's true also. Kibbud Avim, he did, I believe, 2 Sfarim, Kibbud Avim and Hakar Satov. And in Meretz Hashem soon there's going to be a sefer coming out in the Parsha that is being worked on. I don't know if I'm supposed to be saying that, but I know that's something that's being worked on behind the scenes. It's been worked on for a while already, based on his Shiurim. So there are Meretz Hashem things that will be coming out also. So it is something that you could work on, keep it up at aim, Hakar Satov, so on and so forth. Okay. Right. Okay, so here we have another topic. What is the Torah perspective on Israel nowadays? So this is a question that was mentioned before, and I wasn't able to answer because I had to run off. But the Torah perspective on Israel, first of all, that question is really loaded and it could really go in different ways. So I don't know which angle you're asking on, but I'm assuming it's about living in Israel and going to Israel and things like that. So by all means, the majority of the Gedolim, are in Eretz Yisrael, and the majority of the high yeshivas are in Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael, from the aspect of the Torah world, Eretz Yisrael is the place to be, and it is the Kedusha capital of the world, and where we should all strive to be. That being said, not for everybody is it beneficial to go and move to Israel if you're in a good place in America and your kids are in school, and there's a lot of different aspects that you do need to speak to your Rav. But I hope that answered your question. I hope I went the right angle. But if not, you could ask it again. But that's just a general understanding. Oh, here is the question of the contact information of the Makobal I was talking about. So I can't give you the contact information. I could give you the name, but I'm being I started the recording again after the break we had. As soon as I stop the recording, I'll tell you the name, but I can't give you the contact information. I don't know if that's supposed to be going around. It was in Australia, it was in over here. I don't know what the situation is nowadays. And it's not something that you could just go and be like, hey, Rabbi, read my palm, type of thing like that. Okay. Okay, here we go. Why do we cover our eyes when we say Shema Yisrael? When we kabel Ol Malchus Shemayim, we cover our eyes. Next question is, do you have a class in Yichud? We have multiple questions over here. Okay. If you bought something new on the Omer, can you wear it on Shabbos and then wear it during the Omer? Okay, let's go work backwards. When you buy something new, you should not wear it until after Sfira, after the Omer. You shouldn't wear anything new, not even on Shabbos. Can you, in certain areas, speak to your local Orthodox rabbi? In certain situations, maybe there can be some leniencies, but generally not. Do I have a class on Yichud? I don't believe I have anything online that I spoke about it. I don't believe so. Trying to think about it. Okay, the next question is, why do we cover our eyes when we say Shema Yisrael? So when we kabel Ol Malchus Shemayim, first of all, there is. I'll give you, I guess, the very simple answer, and we won't go too much into it. But there is. It's also for a purpose of kavanah. When you close your eyes, you have a certain kavanah. What you're saying, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That is very important to have kavanah during those things, and especially if do a little bit in Kabbalah. There's different machshavas that you're supposed to have when you say even different ways that your eyes are supposed to move during different words, different things that you're supposed to have. But it really is for a kavanah aspect. There are other reasons as well, but we won't get into it now. Next thing is it will be a great joy in Shemayim as well. The day Mashiach comes, and they will know that they're coming back to the Yemais of Mashiach. It is very possible that most of Chavle Mashiach is over. Only Hashem knows. Agreed. I see it's not a question, it's a comment, but yes, I agree, and I hope so. Who do you think will be taking over the organization at the ranch? That's a good question. I don't know. From my understanding, I don't think. Maybe he did, but I don't think Rabbi Wallerstein appointed anybody. But maybe he did. From my understanding, he didn't, but hopefully he did. And Meretz Hashem, it should be taken over, and it should continue and flourish the way that he would have wanted it to. Would you mind recapping on the story with the boy hanging out in the park, and then I missed half of it? Okay, I believe that's where I had some issues with the the internet over here. But basically, there was very, very short because it will be up on Torah Time, Meretz Hashem, and YouTube and whatever else, all other platforms, all the other Spotify and all the other podcast platforms. But the idea was that he was in the middle of the night. He was hanging out with a non-Jewish girl, and they were doing things that they shouldn't have been doing. And all of a sudden, the non-Jewish girl starts seeing things that the boy couldn't see. A guy there laughing. It was like a very, very scary. When he described it, but he couldn't see it. And later, she told him that her family was very involved in kishuf, in dark arts and things that of the Tumah world. And after that, he started having very, very weird stuff happen to him. And he's a normal guy. Like, I know him. He's not a type of guy that's sees like these type of things, like a regular normal guy. And he went over to Rabbi Wallerstein, and Rabbi Wallerstein, told him, he gave, basically the story came out, and he ended up telling him that he has to do certain things, Kabbalistic things. He ended up doing the certain Kabbalistic things, and Baruch Hashem, that all went away. Okay, next, if hypothetically we can meet him, does he see women, the Makubal? I don't know if he sees women, and I don't know if you can meet him. I don't know. I don't think he's in America, and I don't think he's been here for a while. Okay. Next, we're almost done with the question. I think we're almost done with the questions. Okay. Okay. I also wanted to know if the fact that we have a state now is a bad thing. Oh, not necessarily. No, it's not a bad thing. There was, the Satmar sect, the Satmar Rebbe, that didn't like the idea of the state of Israel, and the Torah kind of formed a little bit from that. But the real reason was because from my understanding, was because of the secular education. And again, I don't want to go into all the details of it for whoever was not understanding what I'm saying, but it was because of the secular education. But nowadays, I don't know if there's anybody that disagrees that the fact that there should be anybody of legitimate standing disagrees about the fact that Israel, the state of Israel, should be there, and it's a bad thing. Rather, it's a good thing. Okay, next. Okay, the question is if I'll have a part 2 next week. So that's a good question. I was thinking about it. I really rushed through to get all the information in over here, and I only had 2 days to speak about it. I don't to gather all the information. I'm sorry. I don't know if there's going to be a part 2. I don't think there will be a part 2. But if for whatever reason I get a bunch of more phone calls and information about that I feel like there is a need for a part 2, I will do a part 2. But if not, then I think this will be it. Next question. Where am I over here? Okay. Did Rabbi Wallerstein see the snake on him, or was that the Makubal? No, that was Rabbi Wallerstein. That's the part that really that's he realized who he was. Okay. Next, can the dark arts still be done? I thought when the open miracle stopped, so did the dark arts, because there was an even amount of good and bad. So that is correct. Rav Kamenetsky goes and speaks about that Zelu Mazeh, and how we deal with how there used to be magic and now there's no more magic, how there used to be the powers of demons and there's no more power of demons. That is correct. And nowadays, because we don't have that power of Kedusha, we don't have the power of Tumah. However, it still exists, but it's much more minimal compared to what it used to be. But there is still stuff over there. Again, it's mostly dealing with things, and generally people that deal with these things, they end up getting hurt. They don't gain from it. Physically, and forget about spiritually, that obviously. All right, thank you for the thing. Okay, I made. Oh, all right. Looks like that was the final question. All right, so if anybody has any more questions, if not, then we will. Oh, here's the next question. Do you do kiruv like Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein did? Do I do a kiruv? I try. My focus is kiruv, but it's not only kiruv. I'll tell you something, personally, that when I started speaking, I took a lot of inspiration from Rabbi Wallerstein, the way that he did certain things and the way that he spoke a certain way. I did take a lot of inspiration, and I believe that one of the reasons maybe I should have mentioned this earlier, but one of the reasons that I wanted to give this type of class, that I owe him a lot of Hakaras Tov for the even not even like the guidance, because my interactions with him were pretty minimal. I mean, I spoke to him, Baruch Hashem, quite a few times, but minimal compared to what other people did. But like from his classes, from his understandings, from his guidance, even from the middle of time, I did gain a little bit of a perspective the way that I want to go and in my life. And it is something that I try to do care of like he did. And in Meretz Hashem, if only I could live up to a percentage of what he did. Okay, looks like that was the final question. I want to thank you all for joining. Again, I want to remind everybody that with Meretz Hashem, we do have a class every single week. The link is up there for everybody if they want to join the WhatsApp group, and I'll post it again if anybody wants to join the WhatsApp group to be posted of when we'll have the classes, the next classes, and the topics and things like that. So again, I want to thank you all for joining and for sticking through that the little break that we had. And in Meretz Hashem, we should see Mashiach b'meher b'yameinu, and we should be able to be reunited not only with Rabbi Wallerstein, but with Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky and all the Gedalim and all the Tzaddikim, and be able to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Beis HaMikdash b'meher b'yameinu. Thank you all.